Okay, now anyone in the state, probably the country actually, that's ever talked about the issues of asbestosis, mesothelioma, the contamination that took place at an industrial level against people who'd worked at Wittenoom, or those people who have been working in industries where asbestos was used for many, many, many years, and only to go on and find that they were suffering some form of illness because of it. Anyone that talks about that at any level would know the name Robert Vojakovic, because he was, for many, many years, the fighter, the face of the fight for all those people who had just gone about doing their job only to realise that there were corporations behind this wholesale contamination of workers, and worse still, corporations that knew that they were sending workers potentially to their death when they worked asbestos in this country. An extraordinary story that has continued to unfold over the years as the different generations become impacted by what this insidious product has done around the country. Sadly, Robert Vojakovic lost his life a couple of weeks ago, passed away after all the years that he'd gone through fighting for the workers. And I as a journalist, had much to do with Robert over the years, as he would be ringing up saying, look, I want to tell you about this, or you need to meet this person, or can you help us with this situation? And I was always willing to do so, because he was a pretty humble bloke underneath it all, and all he really wanted to do was get justice. So it's a sad day, of course, it was for his family. Melita Markey is his daughter, and she joins me on the line. Hello, Melita.
Hi, Gary, and thanks for that wonderful introduction for my dad. You summed him up beautifully.
He was one out of the box. I mean, that's what I always remember. Whenever he rang, I'd say, yep, I'll come over to the office in Osborne Park. Invariably, we may sometimes end up at Cafe Amaretto having a coffee or a pasta. But whenever he started telling me a story, I thought, yeah, we've got to do something about this. What was it? Where did that come from, that fight in Robert?
Look, I think it came from, his childhood, coming from a country torn apart by war. Remember the Russians, he was Croatian, the Russians invaded Croatia, so they chucked out Croatian language out of the schools, and he had to learn and read and write Russian. And then he sort of made his way out of Russia as was a refugee in Austria, and then made his way to Australia, to the great country. And he always said to me, Gary, that the greatest gift I can give you is an Australian passport.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, he found, a calling here in the end. I mean, he wouldn't have expected it to happen the way it did, but he did spend some time himself, didn't he, in Wittenoom?
Yes, he did. This is the interesting story. When he was in Austria, and they sent him the Red Cross as a refugee, because he was a young man, he was only 15, 16 years old, they sent him to university to educate him, to get a trade. And in his trade, he was a mining engineer. So when he came to Australia, he saw this job at Wittenoom advertised. He went up there, and he said the conditions were so disgusting. He said in Germany you could eat off the floor of the mine. So straight away he knew something was wrong, the hygiene, and he was bonded. So they took away your wages for 6 months to pay for all your costs. So you couldn't escape it. So he had all these tricks up his sleeve. Because he was an engineer, he used to stuff the machinery up for the day so they could all go swimming in mill streams. He said this was unjust, the way the workers were being treated. And so he was a mischief, and you saw the fun side of my dad even then. And then he was in the single men's quarters at Christmas time, won a ton of cash in poker, and basically bribed the pilot £50 to get him out of the hellhole. He's only there about 6-8 weeks. Yep.
But he obviously made friends there, and he understood the sort of hardship that those people were going through. So what's the point in time when he goes, I'm hearing about, mystery illnesses and my friends and people that have worked there are getting sick. When was that?
That was in 78. There was, would you believe, a story on Four Corners about this mystery disease killing miners. And he saw a photo of himself in a soccer team at Wittenoom on the story. So he contacted the journalists and said, look, I want to get a copy of that photo and why the story, what's happening to the people I met there. So they put him in touch with a fledgling organisation in Canberra that was fighting for justice, and the guys themselves were dying of mesothelioma. So Dad just felt compelled to take up their fight because he knew that they had all been tricked as migrants. Because my father always said, he's had such a great sense. He used to laugh about it. He said, I spoke 6 languages when I came to Australia, just not English. That's how I got tricked.
So
he's a very educated man.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And he sort of, I mean, I remember him once telling me the story about how he befriended, young lawyers and said, this should be something that you guys, make your ambition as well, to expose these corporations and bring them to justice. So he managed to convince people around him.
He did. And that generation of lawyers are some of the most successful barristers and lawyers today. He personally took him under his wing and really gave them a fight to understand the fight for justice. It wasn't about all the cash. It was about, this was so wrong and people really needed to fight. And one of the great champions in his cause, would you believe, is former Premier Peter Dowding when he was the Young Mines Minister and
that's
a lawyer.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
And in 1983, he convinced Peter that something had to be done. And in fact, I caught up with Peter just recently and he still talks about he wished he'd been able to do more looking back.
Yeah,
but back then they thought that was a major achievement, which was changing the statute of limitations.
Yep.
Because companies were relying on the fact that you only had 6 years to report your injury. And of course, these injuries take 20, 30, 40 years to develop.
That's
right. So that was an absolute beautiful legal loophole for them. Oh, the statute of limitation, it was 6 years. So that was the first thing Robert lobbied for and was successful with.
Well, they were able, those corporations, CSR and so on, they were able to literally wait for people to die, weren't they?
Absolutely. Just, rubbing their hands together.
I remember once when Robert called me up and he asked me if I would mind bringing a camera into hospital. I think it was the Charles Gardner Hospital, because he had a member it was going to be too late for them to front court. It was literally going to be too late for them to pen the sort of statement that was required to put into the court case. And I remember him asking me to come in with the camera and record this man's dying testimony. It was one of the most emotional days of my life to watch it happen. I mean, this guy could barely breathe. And to tell that story. And, of course, that's the sort of thing that Robert would do. He'd think outside the square. He got that on tape. He got a record of it, so it was able to be used, not for him, for the gentleman himself, because, of course, he was going to die, but for his family. Absolutely. And that was another law that Robert managed to change, which they still don't have in eastern states, that the family, if the person passes, that they can still make a claim on the estate. So we didn't even have those rules. So that work you did with Robert was incredibly important. How difficult was it? I mean, you were growing up through all of this, for you to watch what your parents were doing, trying to do this in the name of sort of justice and fighting for the little person who had been completely, what's the word? They'd been duped, they'd been conned, they'd been ignored. They obviously had extremely ill health, but to watch it all unfold for you, it must have changed your own character. Oh, it did. The people that my father would bring home, because these people were so desperate, they had nowhere to go. And in those days, there was no social security for people with the disease. The mesothelioma wasn't recognised, and it was so hard to diagnose that often people weren't diagnosed until a couple of weeks before they passed from the disease. So they were seen as malingerers. They really suffered terribly. So Dad was so compassionate. My mum, they opened our home, and we literally started a food bank from our home with donations to give the families support that they needed, and also to get them the help they needed from the hospitals, convince the doctors that this was real. And we had the wonderful Professor Musk, who worked with my father, had such great compassion together, and they really changed Social Security to recognise the disease. So, it was very moving, Graham. And one of the things my mother used to do, my school was up the road from the Charles Gardner Hospital, so my mother would go to the hospital and visit patients. They were very bad shape, and she'd talk to them. Yep. And so she'd say, if you want to lift home from school, meet me up at the hospital. But then she'd say, look, you need to go and chat to the patients because their families are so devastated
they don't know what to say to them when they visit them. So often they don't get a lot of visitors, and they were also in very bad shape. So I'd go and talk to a lot of these patients. So, yeah, you sort of got an understanding of the suffering and how wrong the thing for me, Gary, I think, Grant, was how could people ignore these people? That was the thing that I think. How could people ignore them when they were so ill and all they'd done is just go to work and just to put food on the table for their family? It was simple as that. They're just normal people.
And they were putting themselves in danger from a time of the 1950s when the companies knew full well that blue asbestos could certainly kill. And that's where the evidence eventually sort of surfaced and came out to know that those companies had been doing that regardless of the evidence that was there. Yeah, it's remiss of not talking about Rosemary, your mum, as well, because she was a saint in that regard. Can I just ask you, here we are in 2024, did your dad feel like his job was done or not?
No. Would you believe I'm heading to Sydney in a couple of weeks because James Hardie are now challenging part of an agreement they made with the James Hardie Trust. They want to rewrite the rule and reinterpret the rule. So we're back off to hear this application in New South Wales. So it's just ongoing, companies not wanting to take responsibility or trying to avoid responsibility for the fact that we still have so much asbestos in our built environment. We still have 4,100 deaths a year from asbestos-related diseases, despite it being banned 20 years ago. So there's still so much work to be done. Fortunately, we've got a lot of support in Canberra for a national asbestos eradication plan, which has just been approved. So we're now looking to move that forward. So there's still so much work to be done, Gary. So, yeah, Dad never retired.
No, I know.
Just kept fighting to the end. But, there's the bigger issue too that, so many people from the eastern states came here for help. And the Barayugal people, the Aboriginal people with the James Hardie White asbestos mine, they were completely ignored. So we had an Aboriginal elder come and knock on our front door in the 90s saying, I can't get any help for my people. Will you help? So Dad had him for tea and said he was throwing some, steaks on the barbie, and then came over. He told him the story. The next day, Dad jumped on a plane with him back to New South Wales to help him sort that problem out.
Unbelievable.
Dad helped out with the Mr. Fluffy houses, all the asbestos contamination in Canberra.
Yeah.
So there was so much that he did that was in WA, obviously with CSR and the James Hardie, but he also did so much stuff in the eastern states as well that people don't really know.
No, I remember when he sort of pointed me in the direction of what had happened at Point Sampson in terms of the way that Aboriginal workers were being used to load the bags of asbestos at the time. And when I saw some of the imagery, they're just soaked in it, they're just covered in it, they're just smothered in it. It was just quite extraordinary what had gone on up there, and that's just one point of this story. Hey, I tell you what, I never got to check the veracity of this one, Melita, but if you may be able to. I remember him once telling me, this was the moment when I thought, this guy's got a book in him. He told me the story of one of the members who knew that he was on borrowed time. He knew that mesothelioma was going to kill him. And I hope I'm not giving away trade secrets, but I remember when Robert told me the story of how that member had driven a ute underneath, I think it was CSR or James Hardie's building here in Perth, and it was loaded with sticks of dynamite.
Yeah.
Do you know this story?
Yeah.
Okay. And the bloke had called up Robert and said, that's it, I've decided that this is the only way to deal with these people. So I'm going to blow the whole bloody place up. And your Dad had to sort of quickly jump in the car and drive in there and get the vehicle out so that didn't happen. I mean, that's an extraordinary tale.
Oh, look, and that's the desperation of people. Absolutely. They would come in and Dad would, talk them off ledges, because, oncologists sometimes aren't the most sensitive people when they deliver news.
Yeah.
And so people feel that, well, there's no hope, I'm going to take the bastards with me.
Yeah.
So that's actually not uncommon. People sort of state that, but, some people will actually, act it out. And this particular chap was very angry and emotional And so your dad went in there and talked him off the ledge. But this is the whole thing. These miners do have access to all this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. That was the point, I think, that was being raised with me when your dad told me that story. I think at the point in time he told me it was kind of like off the record, but I think it's okay to tell it now. Melita, obviously a huge legacy he leaves behind. Anyone listening to this that's gone through the battles or knows someone that's gone through the battle of asbestosis or mesothelioma, we see the silicosis battles going on now, even today. So on behalf of us here at 6PR and reporters like me, we obviously give you all our condolence and pass on our best wishes.
Oh, thank you, Gary. And I want to say that, journalism has played a huge part in the success of Robert's work in our organisation, which still continues today, still health checking workers for silicosis and asbestosis. And, the days Rob used to go up to a pub with an old breathing machine in Kalgoorlie and test all the miners there for silicosis, and up north to testing our Indigenous brothers and sisters, that's still going on today, looking after people. So just letting you know, we're still open for business, unfortunately.
Exactly.
Robert never did visit it. But we couldn't have done it without you, Gary, and your mates and the journalists, because journalists can be very cynical, and they got to see that it was real and they got behind it. So without you guys, we wouldn't have had the success without you highlighting these stories. So on behalf of Robert and our family, just to say we couldn't have done it without you guys as well, and you were a big part of that. Dad was very fond of you, which is why I was very keen to chat with you this morning. Your courage and nicking a Channel 10 camera and coming in and filming those statements, that was just brilliant.
All right, well, that was an easy thing for us to do. Thanks very much for talking to us, Melita. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Gary. Bye.